When I first moved to Greenville Heights, I had no idea what I was stepping into. On paper, it was the type of picturesque American suburb that people dream about. Broad streets flanked by tall oaks, neatly trimmed lawns, and families who greeted each other with a friendly nod. My spouse and I had saved for years to purchase our dream home in this community. After all, I'm a strong believer in sustainable living, and Greenville Heights was rumored to be progressive in environmental initiatives, one of the few neighborhoods in the region boasting its own small recycling center. Just a week after we'd lugged the last box inside, I got a knock on the door. A woman stood there, posture impossibly rigid, with an air of command that seemed more fit for a general than a suburban housewife. She wore a tailored blouse, a knee-length pencil skirt, and a crisp blazer despite the afternoon warmth. A short, chunky necklace gleamed at her throat, and her hair was meticulously styled in a helmet-like bob. "Hello, neighbor," she said, voice pitched in forced cheeriness. "I'm Veronica Halbridge, but folks around here sometimes call me Karen." Her laugh was abrupt, a sound that never reached her eyes. "I'm the vice president of our homeowners association, and I make sure everyone follows the rules. Of course, you'll want to be on my good side." Her tone managed to turn the last statement into both a welcome and a threat. I smiled politely. "Great to meet you, Miss Halbridge. I introduced myself, though I left out my position as Executive Director of the National Environmental Preservation and Sustainability Council. Around here, folks just considered me a consultant. I had learned the hard way that revealing my leadership in a national watchdog organization often led to complicated assumptions or unwanted attention. I wanted the chance to settle in quietly. Karen's sharp gaze swept over my front yard. She seemed to catalog every detail. The short walkway lined with solar lights, the newly planted cherry sapling, the wind chimes tinkling softly by the porch. "I'll be scheduling a formal visit soon to go over our neighborhood guidelines," she said, brandishing a thick binder labeled Greenville Heights HOA regulations. She tapped it with a manicured finger. "We take pride in upholding the highest standards. Any questions?" I shook my head. "I think we'll manage fine. My spouse and I believe in keeping a tidy home and caring for the environment. We're looking forward to meeting more neighbors." Karen's eyes narrowed momentarily. "Lovely," she replied. "We are an eco-conscious neighborhood. At least, that's what some people claim. But let me warn you, the recycling center has been quite the nuisance. I'm sure you'll see for yourself." At that, she bid a terse farewell and marched down the walkway, leaving me with an odd sense of foreboding. I hadn't anticipated any friction over recycling. How could anyone despise a resource that helped reduce landfill waste? Maybe she was just one of those types who believed a recycling center blighted the perfect aesthetics of a neighborhood. If only I had known how deep her dislike ran. Within days, I made time to visit the Greenville Heights Recycling Center, which sat on a half-acre lot at the edge of the neighborhood. It was modest: 4 large collection bins, a small overhead shelter, a staff kiosk, and a sign encouraging residents to drop off plastic, paper, glass, and metal. A few volunteers came by daily to help manage any overflow, and the city waste department picked up sorted recyclables weekly. I immediately saw the center's potential, though it was clearly underfunded and underpromoted. There weren't enough labeled bins. People occasionally left items in the wrong places. Still, I was impressed by how dedicated the volunteers were. An older gentleman named Mr. Dupree offered me a tour. "We started this place about 6 years ago," he explained, pushing his thick-framed glasses up his nose. "A group of us convinced the previous HOA board to let us build this. It cuts down on the town's overall waste and fosters a sense of community. At least, that's the idea." I smiled in appreciation. "I think it's wonderful, and with more support, it could be even better." Mr. Dupree's expression clouded. "Not everyone agrees. We have a new HOA vice president who thinks it's an eyesore, Veronica Halbridge, I believe." Indeed, this validated my earlier suspicions. She mentioned something about it being a nuisance, but it's a public good. He shrugged, looking resigned. "Try telling that to her. She's all about property values. She insists the center attracts rodents, that it's unsightly, and that it lowers the tone of the neighborhood. Some folks love it, others hate it. She's determined to see it closed." I walked around, noting that if the volunteers had a little more funding or resources, they could keep the center pristine. Issues like occasional litter overflow could be addressed with better infrastructure: a small fence, more collection bins, or scheduled staff times. My mind was already racing with ideas on how to improve the place. But a creeping sense of dread settled in, too. If Karen was as influential as she claimed, she could whip up enough dissatisfaction to undermine the center's existence. Little did she know, I wielded significant influence in environmental policy circles statewide, and indeed, nationwide. I had no desire to be adversarial, but if push came to shove, I wouldn't stand by while an essential resource got shut down for petty reasons. A few weeks into our stay, everything seemed mostly fine. No major HOA infractions, no heated conflicts. Yet Karen's presence lingered. She'd pop by unannounced with that binder in hand, scrutinizing our front hedges or measuring the grass height. She never found legitimate faults with our property, so she seemed to fixate on smaller and smaller potential violations. One day, she left a notice about our porch light being too bright. Another time, she claimed our compost bin out back needed to match the color scheme of the house. I addressed each request politely, though I felt the exasperation welling up inside me. Meanwhile, the recycling center's usage was increasing, presumably because the local city council had begun encouraging more robust recycling efforts. The volunteers buzzed with excitement, as new families in the neighborhood were eager to properly sort their recyclables. This momentum worried Karen, apparently. She began vocalizing complaints at HOA meetings. "We can't allow a dump to flourish in our backyard," she exclaimed, rapping her knuckles on a table. Rats, raccoons, stray cats, all scurrying around, rummaging through trash. Not to mention the aesthetic blight. Do we want our children playing near rotting garbage? Several other members seemed sympathetic, but just as many residents argued in favor of the center. They pointed out how it significantly reduced household trash, saved them trips to the larger city facilities, and taught kids about environmental responsibility. Still, Karen's voice was loudest, and she held a position of authority within the HOA board. She declared she would personally investigate every potential health code or property value violation caused by the center to justify shutting it down. Watching from the audience, I felt torn about whether to reveal my credentials. I wanted to handle this peacefully, to show the community that the center was an asset worth preserving. But if Karen was determined, she could turn the situation into a legal or bureaucratic headache for the volunteers. Maybe it was time for me to step in, quietly but effectively. I arranged to sit down with a friend of mine, Rebecca Walters, who worked at the state's Department of Environmental Services. Over coffee at a local cafe, we spoke in hushed tones about the recycling center's uncertain fate. "I've seen it happen before," Rebecca said, stirring her mug absent-mindedly. "A well-functioning but modest community project gets targeted by a handful of naysayers who have sway in the local HOA. They'll dig up obscure regulations, twist data on safety or property values, and rally others with fear." I sighed. The center's design is solid. It just needs a few improvements: larger covered bins, clearer signage, maybe even a small fence to keep wildlife out. Those aren't insurmountable obstacles. Rebecca nodded. If you can mobilize enough local support, you'll overshadow her complaints. Homeowners associations thrive on majority rule. However, if Karen's particularly influential, she may try a more direct route, claiming the center violates the neighborhood covenant or a local ordinance. I tapped my phone, displaying pictures I'd taken at the center. I plan to propose upgrades at the next HOA meeting, with cost estimates and evidence that it boosts property values by making the neighborhood more eco-friendly. If Karen tries to shoot me down, I'll have official data to counter her claims. Rebecca leaned in. "And if that fails, you could always go public with who you are. Bring the weight of your national platform. But I know how you prefer a local solution first." Smiling, I pocketed my phone. "Right. I just hope it doesn't come to that. I don't like using my title as a battering ram, but I won't watch a perfectly good recycling center be demolished." That day, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Karen might have a loud voice and an official-sounding rulebook, but I possessed the knowledge, and possibly the final card, to protect the environment. If she insisted on an all-out war, I was prepared to fight. Despite my diplomatic hopes, Karen's antagonism escalated. Over the next month, she orchestrated an unsettling campaign against the recycling center. She circulated petitions claiming the center was a public health hazard. The wording was alarmist, invoking images of disease-ridden rodents and rotting refuse. She went door to door with a tight-lipped smile, urging neighbors to protect our children's health and property values. HOA meetings. She repeatedly introduced motions to defund any HOA-sponsored maintenance for the center. While the project mostly ran on volunteers, the HOA did cover small monthly expenses, like a fraction of the electricity for lighting and some signage. Karen insisted they cut that funding to force the center's closure. Inspections. She persuaded the HOA board to hire a private inspection firm to probe for violations. On 2 separate visits, the inspectors found minor infractions, like a broken latch on a bin and some scattered litter. Hardly grounds for shutdown, but Karen magnified them as critical failures. To counter her, I quietly organized with other residents. We collected signatures supporting the center, hosted small events, like a children's craft day using recycled materials, to showcase the positive impact. Mr. Dupree, the longtime volunteer, spoke passionately about the center's historical roots in Greenville Heights. Yet, Karen's relentless negativity began to wear people down. Some neighbors who initially loved the recycling center started to feel anxious. They worried about lawsuits, fines, or conflicts with the HOA. A rumor spread that if the center remained, homeowner premiums might skyrocket. Fear was creeping in, weakening the defenders' resolve. One evening, after a heated HOA debate, Karen cornered me in the clubhouse parking lot. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across her face, giving her stern features an almost predatory edge. "You're quite determined," she said flatly, arms folded. "You're new here, but you've become the biggest advocate for that facility. I don't suppose you realize how quickly property values can tank if potential buyers see a giant dump at the edge of the neighborhood." I remained calm, though I felt the sting of her words. "I've done my research. Properly run recycling centers don't decrease property values at all. In fact, many communities view it as a beneficial amenity." She pursed her lips into a thin, displeased line. "You're entitled to your opinion, but the real estate data I have suggests otherwise. Let me make myself perfectly clear that recycling centers' days are numbered. I'll see to it personally that it's removed before year's end." Without waiting for a reply, she turned on her heel and stalked off, leaving me under the flickering parking lot light, thoroughly unsettled. My quiet, suburban dream had turned into a tug-of-war with a woman determined to bury an environmentally friendly project, and her threat felt scarily real. I soon learned that Karen wasn't just spewing empty words. She filed a formal complaint with the Greenville County Environmental Health Department, alleging that the recycling center was violating local ordinances. She claimed it lacked proper enclosures, had hazardous runoffs, and risked contaminating the nearby creek. When the county inspector arrived, I was present as a volunteer observer. To the relief of the recycling center's supporters, the inspection yielded good news. Aside from minor improvements recommended, like sealing a few cracks in the pavement and adding a sturdier fence, everything was compliant with local code. The site was well managed. No mention of immediate closure. Karen did not take this outcome graciously. She berated the county inspector, accusing them of not being thorough enough. She demanded additional tests, threatened to call and hire authorities. The inspector, a mild-mannered man, politely stood his ground. Karen left the scene in a huff, practically trembling with frustration. Yet, that night, rumors flew that Karen was preparing a legal approach, combing through the original HOA documents, seeking any clause that might give the board leverage to shutter the center. If she found something, some overlooked requirement about structures built on HOA land, she could present it in a board vote and move for immediate closure. I mulled over my options. Should I go public with who I really am? If the board realized that the recycling center's biggest champion was actually a high-profile environmental figure, they might hesitate. But the flip side was that Karen could twist it, accusing me of using my title to manipulate the community. That could create more backlash. Eventually, I decided to continue the slow, steady approach, mobilizing neighbors, ensuring compliance, gathering supporting data, and waiting to see if Karen's bluff had any teeth. The tension peaked at a special HOA board meeting called by Karen under the pretext of urgent neighborhood concerns. Word spread that she intended to present damning evidence against the recycling center. Residents packed the community clubhouse that evening, anxious to see what she would say. Karen stood at the front of the room, brandishing a stack of documents. She wore a confident smirk, as though she'd already won. The board president, Marjorie Liu, attempted to maintain decorum, but it was clear Karen was controlling the agenda. Fellow neighbors, Karen began, I've uncovered a serious breach in our community guidelines. According to Section 8, Paragraph 3 of our Master Covenant, any new structure, shed, or facility built on HOA-owned land must receive a supermajority vote before it can remain permanent. The recycling center, established 6 years ago, was never formalized in that manner. Therefore, it's operating illegally under our own bylaws. The room erupted in hushed alarm. People exchanged panicked looks. She pressed on, raising her voice to override murmurs. I am proposing an immediate resolution. We demand the recycling center's closure and removal within 60 days. Let us keep our neighborhood in compliance with its own rules. Marjorie adjusted her glasses, glancing at the documents. Veronica, Ms. Halbridge, are you certain this applies? The center was approved by the previous board. They even had a small budget for it. Karen's eyes flashed triumphantly. Yet they never filed the official addendum for a permanent structure. We have no record of a supermajority vote. It's a clear violation. Mr. Dupree rose, voice quavering in indignation. But the entire community welcomed it back then. We have sign-in sheets showing the majority of homeowners supported it. Karen shook her head with a look of feigned pity. That's not how legal processes work. If it wasn't done per the covenant, it's invalid. I move for a vote this very evening. Marjorie frowned. We'll need a formal motion and second. Let's proceed carefully. Karen pressed a button on her laptop, projecting slides with highlights of the covenant text. Her allies on the board nodded in unison. One of them seconded the motion. This was it, the moment. If Karen succeeded in ramming this vote through, the center might indeed be forced to close. I cleared my throat, stood up, and addressed the board, determined not to let the center go down without a fight. All eyes turned toward me as I stepped to the microphone. I had brought printouts, but the tension weighed so heavily that my heart thundered. Members of the board and neighbors, I began, keeping my tone steady. I've lived here only a short time, but I've observed how this recycling center has benefited the community. Children learn about sustainability. Families save money on trash fees. The site is well maintained, and repeated inspections show no health hazards. Let's think carefully before destroying something valuable over a technicality. Karen gave me an icy smile. Perhaps you'd like to cite exact bylaws that override the language we're presenting? I flipped through my notes. We do acknowledge the covenant's requirement for major structural changes, but the center was established with the implicit consent of the HOA at the time. Also, it's possible to fix this oversight by conducting the supermajority vote now, properly, rather than rushing to tear down the center. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several hands shot up from the audience, urging the board to hold a fair, community-wide vote. Karen looked livid. She glared at me as if I were a stubborn weed she couldn't yank from her precious lawn. She huffed. Even if we hold a new vote, it's still occupying HOA land illegally. The simplest solution is closure. Or are we to reward rule-breaking? I refuse to back down. Surely, Miss Halbridge, we can find a rational solution. This is a minor administrative oversight. The center is a net positive, and we can retroactively legitimize it. Her cheeks flushed, but she maintained her composure for the audience. Well, you're certainly passionate about it. I wonder why. Perhaps you have a personal agenda? I braced myself, feeling that she was steering the conversation toward me, her real target. I just believe in the benefits of recycling and community engagement. Her tone grew more pointed. We all know you have some background in environmentalism, but if you care so much, maybe buy private land for your center. Stop forcing the entire neighborhood to suffer this eyesore. Seething inside, I took a deep breath. The time had come. I couldn't keep my identity hidden. If the board was about to cast a deciding vote, they needed to know precisely who they were dealing with, and that shutting down the center had broader implications. But before I spoke again, the board decided they would review further documentation and meet in 1 week to cast the final vote. Karen shot me a triumphant smirk as the session ended, but she had no idea how the next week would unfold, or that her entire plan was about to unravel. The day after the contentious meeting, I called an emergency session of my own, with volunteers and supportive residents at Mr. Dupree's home. The living room was cramped with concerned faces, from parents to senior citizens. all eager to stop Karen's forced closure. I cleared my throat, addressing them softly. I haven't been completely transparent about who I am. I'm not just a local consultant. I glanced around, nervous but determined. I'm the executive director of the National Environmental Preservation and Sustainability Council. My team has influenced legislation and policy across multiple states. If the HOA tries to shut down the recycling center on dubious grounds, we have federal-level guidelines and environmental regulations that can protect our cause. A stunned hush fell over the group. A few recognized my name from articles or interviews. Mr. Dupree blinked in disbelief, then smiled broadly. Why didn't you say so before? I exhaled. I've learned that wearing a big title in a small neighborhood can be polarizing. I wanted to build relationships organically. But with Karen so determined, we can't afford to tiptoe around. My organization can provide legal counsel, data, even media coverage to defend this center. The mood in the room soared. Hope replaced anxiety. One parent, Ms. Fernandez, whispered in awe, "She's messing with the wrong person then." I nodded. I want to handle this respectfully. Let's gather formal statements from residents, written endorsements of the center. Let's prepare to demonstrate that over 2/3 of the neighborhood wants this service, thus fulfilling the supermajority requirement. We'll meet them on the terms of the covenant and beat them fair and square. If the board still tries to close it, we'll escalate. And so, a whirlwind of activity began. We drafted a petition clearly stating, we, the undersigned, formally endorse the continued operation of the Greenville Heights Recycling Center and support its official incorporation into the HOA covenant. Volunteers canvassed the streets, knocking on doors, explaining the real facts, how the center posed no health threat, how minor upgrades could be funded collaboratively, and how it actually aligned with modern community values. In less than 4 days, we secured signatures from well over 70% of homeowners. It was a remarkable show of unity. People who had been on the fence saw the wave of support and joined in. The momentum was unstoppable. By the weekend, I had a binder filled with signatures, data from the county inspectors, statements from environmental experts, and cost proposals for any recommended improvements. It was time to present our case to the board and to Karen. The night of the final HOA vote arrived. The community clubhouse was packed once again, brimming with anticipation. I arrived early, carrying the binder under one arm, supported by volunteers who lugged boxes of petition forms. Karen spotted me from across the room, her eyes narrowing in suspicion at the sight of the swelling crowd. The board president, Marjorie, opened the meeting. We'll begin with the motion from our last session regarding the recycling center's compliance with the neighborhood covenant. Ms. Halbridge, do you have anything to add before we proceed? Karen stood, lips curved in a smug smile. Yes, I do. After thorough review, it's evident the facility was never granted official status. Therefore, I reaffirm my motion that the center be dismantled. In the interest of fairness, we'll allow the opposition to speak, though I doubt they'll have anything conclusive to show. She looked pointedly in my direction, expecting me to falter. Instead, I rose calmly, glancing at the crowd. Madam President, board members, and neighbors, I'd like to submit evidence that the recycling center has overwhelming community support. I handed Marjorie the binder. She flipped through page after page of signatures, her eyebrows rising higher with each turn. It appears we have a significant number of homeowners endorsing the center. Karen blinked, her confidence wavering. That doesn't matter if it was built illegally in the first place. I cleared my throat to get everyone's attention. We also have a letter from the county health department stating that the center is compliant with environmental and health standards, along with a plan to address any minor improvements. The cost would be minimal, and we have volunteers ready to do the work. Marjorie scanned the documents, looking impressed. So, effectively, you're proposing a resolution that grants official HOA recognition to the recycling center, retroactively fulfilling any covenant requirements for a permanent structure on our land. Yes, I said, projecting my voice so everyone could hear. And that supermajority vote the covenant calls for? We have it right here. Over 70% of homeowners have signed the endorsement. That's more than enough to legitimize the center fully. Karen began to sputter. You can't just, we don't even know who this person truly is. I calmly took a step forward. As for my credentials, I'm the executive director of the National Environmental Preservation and Sustainability Council. I've worked closely with federal and state agencies to establish environmentally friendly initiatives around the country. And I can assure you that Greenville Heights stands to be recognized as a model community if we preserve and improve this center. A hush fell over the assembly, broken only by a few gasps. The reveal landed heavily, and Karen's face flushed crimson with shock, and perhaps a touch of dread. She realized that the person she'd tried to bully was not just a random homeowner, but someone who wielded substantial influence in the environmental sector. Marjorie coughed delicately. That changes the scope, doesn't it? Ms. Halbridge, do you still wish to maintain your motion to dismantle the recycling center? Karen's eyes darted around, looking for support, but even some of her usual allies shifted uneasily. The sheer volume of evidence stacked against her position was overwhelming. She tried to salvage her argument. These signatures were collected on short notice. Some residents may have been misled. A father in the audience stood up, glaring at Karen. We're not misled. We want to keep the center. This is our voice. Other neighbors echoed his sentiment. The mood was unified, resolute. Karen's gaze flicked back to me, her lips pressing into a thin line. She could see that she was outmatched. Yet her pride remained, as if she refused to yield even in the face of defeat. Marjorie proceeded with a formal count from the petition forms, verifying the threshold. When the tally was complete, the board concluded that the center indeed had the needed support. Karen glowered, but she was cornered. The final vote was cast. The board sided overwhelmingly with legalizing the recycling center under the HOA covenant and committing funds for necessary upgrades. Applause thundered through the clubhouse. After the meeting adjourned, Karen lurked in a corner, refusing to celebrate. As I packed up my documents, she approached me, her voice clipped. You lied to me from the start. You pretended to be some nobody, all while working behind my back. This is an ambush. I faced her calmly. I didn't lie. I never said I wasn't involved in environmental work. I simply didn't flaunt my position, and I tried to reason with you as a neighbor. But you left me no choice. She jutted her chin out, eyes shining with defiance. You'll regret making me look foolish. I shook my head, sighing softly. There's nothing to regret about standing up for a good cause, Ms. Halbridge. Maybe in time you'll see the center's value. Without waiting for a reply, I turned away, already surrounded by neighbors offering heartfelt thanks. In the days following the meeting, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement over the center's victory. Volunteers sprang into action, organizing fundraising drives for the necessary improvements, a new fence, additional signage, and rodent-proof bins. The local media picked up the story. Grassroots win. Greenville Heights chooses sustainability, some headlines read. Others emphasized the David and Goliath dynamic, a small HOA trying to shutter an eco-friendly initiative, only to discover that one of its residents was a national environmental leader. Meanwhile, Karen's aura of authority took a hit. Many neighbors questioned her tactics. Why had she so aggressively opposed a beneficial resource? She tried to salvage her image, claiming she only wanted to enforce rules. But the dominant narrative was that she'd favored property values over the common good. Ironically, real estate agents were now praising the center's official status, marketing Greenville Heights as environmentally conscious. That's exactly the opposite of her initial claim that it would drive prices down. Still, Karen wasn't the type to disappear quietly. She filed a final protest with the HOA, asserting that some of the petition signatures might be invalid. The board conducted a quick review and found no significant discrepancies, solidifying the outcome. The recycling center remained. In private, I couldn't help but wonder what motivated her. Was it purely aesthetic? Did she truly believe a recycling facility was an eyesore? Or did she resent anyone who challenged her control? Regardless, the community had spoken. That, at least, was a comfort. Yet, I felt a lingering caution. Karen might be licking her wounds, but I doubted she would vanish without attempting some form of retribution. As the recycling center improvements began, I devoted time to overseeing the upgrades, coordinating with the city's waste management department, and ensuring compliance with all relevant codes. The newly installed fencing was both attractive and functional. We switched out the older bins for modern, covered ones that locked securely. Local kids painted murals on the side panels, creating a vibrant collage of environmental themes, flowers, trees, a bright sun, and the words, "Our future, our home." The transformation was breathtaking. What had once been a utilitarian space took on the energy of a communal art project. Residents, delighted, posted about it on social media. Donations poured in. An eco-friendly company even sponsored free high-quality recycling bags for each household. Far from diminishing property values, these developments earned Greenville Heights a mention in a regional Most Sustainable Communities list. The positive publicity saw new families moving in, excited to be part of a neighborhood that valued environmental stewardship. Ironically, realtors began highlighting the center as a selling point. Several homes that went on the market sold quickly and at strong prices. For a time, it seemed Karen's dire warnings had proven entirely false. Or, more cynically, that she had inadvertently spurred the center into a glow-up that boosted everyone's fortunes. But even good news travels alongside envy in some circles. Karen had gone uncharacteristically quiet in public. Rumor had it she was meeting privately with her closest allies, drafting new strategies to undermine me and the center. I hoped it was just idle gossip. Still, I stayed vigilant, recognizing she was the type to hold grudges. The calm lasted a few more weeks. Then, one chilly morning, I woke to frantic text messages from Mr. Dupree. "Come to the center, SCP. Something's wrong." I rushed over, finding a small group of volunteers huddled near the new fence. Vandals had pried open one of the gates during the night, ripping down sections of the mural. Trash was strewn about, bins overturned. It looked like deliberate sabotage, a far cry from random hooliganism, given the center's newly installed locks and cameras. Police arrived to take statements and collect evidence. The security cameras showed a figure wearing a hoodie, their face partially obscured. Though it was impossible to identify them definitively, the clothing and posture suggested an adult, not a teenage prankster. No license plates were visible on the grainy footage. My gut churned with suspicion. Could Karen have orchestrated this? It was impossible to say without proof, yet no one else had such a vested interest in harming the center. The sabotage was too targeted. The police promised to investigate further, but these matters can be tricky if the perpetrator left no clear trace. The next day, Karen surfaced at an emergency HOA gathering, pointing to the vandalism as proof that the center attracted criminals. "See how it invites trouble?" she proclaimed. "This is exactly what I warned about. Now we have to spend more money on repairs and increase security. Whose pockets does that come from? Ours." I stood up, trying to remain calm. Vandalism is unfortunate, but we can't blame the facility for the actions of one criminal. We have cameras, and the police will find whoever did it. Karen gave me a withering glare. Or maybe the center is a magnet for undesirable elements. It's bringing negative attention to our community. I demand the board reconsider its decision. This fiasco is a public safety hazard. But the crowd, now more informed and supportive of the center, didn't rally to her cause. Most were outraged at the vandal, not the center itself. They recognized that shutting down a popular facility because of one malicious act was misguided. The board stood by the center, pledging additional security measures rather than closing it. Karen's face tightened as she realized she had lost that battle, too. More and more, she was isolated, her arguments a broken record that no longer resonated. She marched out of the clubhouse, leaving behind a swirl of uneasy silence. If she had orchestrated the vandalism, it had backfired. Over time, the community's resolve to protect the recycling center only grew stronger. Neighbors held a fundraiser, collecting enough to install high-definition cameras and motion sensor lights around the perimeter. Volunteers spent days restoring the vandalized murals, turning the damage into an opportunity for fresh artwork, this time even more vivid and hopeful than before. Local media covered the story of resilience, how Greenville Heights, once divided by a bitter HOA feud, had banded together to ensure sustainability and safety. The press even interviewed me in my capacity as the executive director of the National Environmental Council. While I typically shied from personal spotlight, I used the platform to highlight the community's spirit, praising the volunteers for their dedication. Eventually, the police identified a suspect in the vandalism, someone loosely associated with a local contractor who had once bid to remove the center's bins. The suspect refused to name any accomplices. While it never conclusively tied back to Karen, many residents privately believed she'd pulled the strings. Publicly, however, she maintained her innocence, claiming she was as shocked as everyone else. The aftermath left Karen's reputation in tatters. Though she remained part of the HOA board for a time, her influence waned to near irrelevance. Each subsequent meeting saw her proposals dismissed or met with skepticism by neighbors who remembered her relentless campaign of fear-mongering. In a twist of poetic justice, property values did not plunge. If anything, they stabilized or even rose slightly. Families looking to settle in Greenville Heights appreciated the strong communal bond and the convenience of a well-maintained recycling hub. As for me, I continued living my suburban life with renewed peace. The center was now officially recognized and better supported. Thanks to the improvements and the wave of community pride, it became a social hub as well, a place to mingle, share sustainable practices, and even plan local cleanup events. People teased me, calling me the secret eco-hero next door. But I always insisted the real heroes were the everyday neighbors who decided they wouldn't let petty politics destroy a good thing. A year later, while I tidied up the yard, I spotted Karen standing at the boundary of her property. She was staring toward the recycling center's newly painted sign. She wore a more subdued outfit, her posture less rigid. She caught me looking, and, for a moment, our eyes locked. I expected an icy glare or a curt avoidance. Instead, she gave me a tight, hesitant nod, something akin to a reluctant greeting. I approached, unsure what to expect. She raised a hand to stop me from speaking. "Before you say anything, she paused, eyes flickering with some internal conflict. "I just want you to know that I might have been misguided. This place," she gestured vaguely toward the center, "it's not so bad. My grandkids think it's cool." Her voice had lost its combative edge, and though she struggled to say the words, it sounded like a grudging admission of defeat or a step toward acceptance. Gently, I nodded. "I'm glad they like it, Karen." She looked down at the grass, swallowing what remained of her pride. "Anyway, I won't keep you. Have a nice day." With that, she turned and walked inside. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was something, a quiet thawing, perhaps, of the Cold War she'd waged. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. The recycling center's existence was secure, the community was thriving, and Karen, while not exactly warm, was no longer actively sabotaging everything. In the end, the best possible outcome had emerged. A community that stood up for what mattered, overcame petty obstacles, and discovered a deeper sense of unity. Life in Greenville Heights went on. Families grew, gardens flourished, and the gentle hum of daily life carried forward, grounded by a common purpose of environmental consciousness. With Karen quiet at last, neighbors could celebrate their communal success and look toward the future with optimism. The best neighborhoods, it turns out, aren't defined by spotless lawns and strict rules, but by the resilience, cooperation, and empathy of the people who call them home. And in that regard, Greenville Heights had achieved something truly special. Together, we learned that doing the right thing, even in the face of stubborn opposition, can transform a community and maybe even soften a Karen's heart.